man. That's right, fresh new bike from my friends over at Orbea. Oh. I want to give a big thanks to my friends over at Jensen USA who sponsored this video. Thank you, Jensen. Jensen is a leading online retailer here in the United States for Orbea bicycles. I've got a link in the YouTube description below over to Jensen USA, where you can check out all the fine Orbea bikes they have in stock now. Furthermore, anything you purchase from that link below will directly help support me, and that's how I make these videos happen. Beyond Jensen, I'm also supported by Industry 9, P&W Components, and Shimano. Okay, let's see what's just in this giant brown box. One of my favorite parts of making videos is when something like this shows up, a brand new bike that I haven't personally seen myself yet, and I have no idea what to expect. Oh, nice. Oh, cool. This thing looks incredible. Okay. This is the new Orbea Occam. Let's take a look at it, put it together. I'll link to some of the older Orbea content I did up in your top right corner of the screen. If you remember, last year I spent a good deal of time on the previous generation Occam. I also did a whole video explaining who Orbea is as a brand. So I'm gonna run it with a few parts that are different than the parts my sponsors make, just to kind of get a feel for how the bike is originally spec'd out and shipped out. And then once I understand it better, I'm gonna put on my normal, usual parts so I get more of a control feel, and then I can honestly do a better job of comparing it to other bikes that I ride every day. Anyone else who's dad life out there will totally understand why I'm putting a Mac ride on here. Ultimately, I'm gonna run a P&W Components dropper on here, but first I wanna try the stock setup out. And I'm already seeing this tiny amount of drop. I really like having the 200 mil drop, which is on most of my other bikes. I do remember on the last Occam, I did not love the Physique saddle. I hope this one does a little bit better with my backside. I'm gonna swap out the tires in just a moment, but before I do that, I wanna show you what might be stock spec. The new Occam has a little bit more travel than the old. This is a 150 frame. The last one was a 140. It's basically the same suspension layout. It's got a new linkage. I think with the new linkage, they were able to fit a different stroke shock. I gotta double check the numbers, but I don't know how they got that 10 mils in there. So hopefully this is a much more progressive kinematics than the older one, because the coil is linear in nature. So if it's a linear kinematics, I might end up bottoming it out a lot. One thing that's super cool, you turn this and you get a little multi-tool built into your linkage there. This bike here is set up with the Shimano XT 12-speed group set. It's using race face controls and wheels. It comes with some Maxxis tires. I'm gonna swap on some double down casing. This is the Exo Trail. I don't have the best of luck with Exo casing. I generally need the most heavy duty casing I can fit, and double down does really well for me. So I'm just installing a Jensen USA house brand water bottle cage from Foundation. I've had good experiences with these cages on my Yeti and on my Cro-Mag. I've got some beefier tires thrown on here. I got an Ascai double down up front, 2.5. Maxxis Minion DHR2 in back, 2.4, I wanna say, yeah, 2.4. Both of these are the WT versions, so hopefully we don't have any issues with flats. All right, enough of that. Let's go hit some actual trails. Let's go. We just did a pretty fun ride. I was on the Occam. Logan rode my Ritmo V2. The Ritmo has less travel, but I'd call it an enduro bike. And then we have the mystery of the Occam. Looking at the geometry numbers of the Occam, it looks kind of more like a trail bike. And then you look at the suspension travel, 150 front and back, and you're like, wait a second, this is almost an enduro bike. So yes, this thing has more rear travel than the Ritmo, but the Ritmo is a much more aggressive bike. That's the mystery. You can't look at the numbers too much, at least not in a vacuum, each individual number. Today's ride though, we pedaled up and up and up forever. We did 3,000 feet of vertical today, got up into the Alpine, and the dirt was super soft. And that was fun on the Occam because you could just lay it over and crank it through the turns, and the short wheelbase through those corners was definitely fun. I would probably say the short wheelbase could be a little bit nervous once you get over like 30 miles an hour, but most of these Alpine trails and backcountry trails, you're not going that fast. So yeah, if I was racing enduro, I wouldn't want to be on a trail bike, but on actual trails, the thing handles pretty good. The way it's so maneuverable, you can get around with the bigger, rockier, chunkier things. I remember there was one real fun section where we came around a corner and I thought there was people wearing red shirts standing there, but no. Turns out that's fall. That's the next season, and I'm excited for it to arrive. And yeah, the first time I've seen fall leaves was today. But then there's a little rock jump, and man, that was a perfect spot for the Occam. It just boop, pops right up in the air, and it's easy to put it where you want it on the trail. I had a couple moments on today's ride where I had the confidence to just randomly pull up and jump, not knowing what was coming up. I think I have some GoPro footage of one rise in particular where I just kind of, it might not look that extreme in the GoPro, but I didn't know what was there, but I felt like I could probably land and maneuver my way around anything dangerous and just kind of went for it. And it worked, which was cool. Oh! Braking traction was fine. The way it sagged in, I tightened it down to 28 clicks of preload, which is the max. I'm 170 pounds. I think it's a 425 or 400 pound spring, something like that. So we can totally go up a spring rate there. I got full travel out of the 36 150 up front. That's a really fun fork. I really liked it. The first 3 or 4 rides, I really hadn't changed much to the bike. Once I got it dialed in on this first ride, the suspension felt right up my alley, the tire pressure was fine, and until I swap over my wheels, handlebar stem, dropper seat post, you know, I'm pretty happy with the current setup. I did have one near-death moment on the ride, and luckily we had Logan's follow cam to help capture it. That was wild.
Nice save.
Here's a quick replay.
Is your pedal bent?
I don't know.
I think you caught it on this here.
Caught it back on that one.
Yeah, I think you caught your pedal right here.
That makes sense, because I was like planning on a sweet jump.
Yeah, it's a good save.
Oh well. Yeah. This does bring up a good point. I have bent quite a few pedals and crank arms over the last year, but one thing I do enjoy about the Occam is it's not a super low bottom bracket height. Anyhow, since I really just use these videos as an excuse to go ride some cool spots, let's move on to the next day on the Occam. Today's ride was a little bit of a doozy. Super mellow climb up, the Occam climbs just fine. It's short travel, it's relatively lightweight. You know, no complaints about climbing it. Besides, that dang saddle. I don't have a tiny little Spanish tail. I don't have a culito like some of the Spaniards. I've got a huge American rear end, and I could go for a little bit bigger of a saddle.
It's hard in the wind.
Once the trail kind of mellowed out a little bit, which is the majority of it, this thing was fun, real fun. It's not crazy long and slack. So you gotta ride it a little bit differently than say a Ritmo, the SB 130, the Altitude, whatever. But it's definitely very entertaining. That's a wheelie. The back end feels nice and short, which means it's really easy to pull into a manual. And then the front end is also pretty short, so it's easy to control those manuals and do them around corners or a little bit. I don't think I had any really sweet manuals today, but yeah, this thing manuals really nicely, in case you're wondering. That also translates to little bunny hops and just random pops. Because it is a little bit shorter, it's a lot easier to get off the ground than some of those longer bikes. In the tight corners, this thing did really well. I found I could just kind of load up on the rear wheel and then lean it down a little and pull back, my super old school cornering technique, and it worked killer in the tighter little switchbacks. It's definitely worth mentioning that even though this bike has what seems to be a tad more travel than a lot of other bigger bikes, I keep talking about how it's not that big of a bike. Well, the head tube angle isn't all that slack. As a result, that's kind of why the wheelbase is a little bit on the shorter side. However, This just means the bike really requires a very active riding style. If you've been enjoying my videos and following me for a while, you'll see that I am Captain Active Riding Style. So that plays to this bike's strengths. This is not a plow bike. This is definitely a finesse bike. Because it's easy to be nimble with, it can really be played correctly in that regards. But once you get tired into some faster trails, that's where you might find the bike gives up some to the longer, harder to ride enduro bikes. I'm actually glad bikes like this exist, bikes that have capable suspension, but a little bit more traditional geometry, because on a lot of trails, this is a more fun setup than a bigger bike. We had a couple cool exposed cliff sections that were kind of reminiscent of some other trails we rode last year on e-bikes. I wanted to do rad tricks there, but I didn't want to die, so we skipped that. The Occam's been fun, and I'm excited to try it out on some different trails. After thawing ourselves out and peeling all those rocks and dirt out of our eyeballs, we decided to go ride some other trails that, once again, are higher altitude and a little more backcountry, but I'm totally using this bike as an excuse to simply ride new trails that I just want to explore.
Max of Champions. Like, share, and subscribe, everybody. Once again, we're riding a new to us trail. We just hiked and pushed our bikes for the last 2 hours. We're about to drop in. We got about a 3,000 foot descent. I think the Occam's gonna be a really good bike for these kind of tight, technical, more natural trails. And there's pretty cool views up here too. We just got done with another banger ride here. We're pretty backcountry in the Northwest. And man, this is exactly where this bike excels. Out here, the trails, they're natural, they're a little bit tighter, they're not built up with tons of berms and all that. And the Occam's really good in those situations. That's why this bike's a little bit of a mystery. The way it has a little bit more travel than the geometry might make you think. When you're someplace pretty rough, but not necessarily super high speed, which is a lot of these more traditional trails, it ends up giving you lots of traction to cruise through the corners. It gives you a lot more confidence in the straightaways, but you still have that little bit steeper front end, a little bit shorter wheelbase, so getting through the tight corners isn't really a chore. One of our surprises today, we're coming down this super steep connector trail, and all of a sudden there is just this rad section of banger little switchbacks. And I never skidded through any of them, but the way the Occam corners, and I think that's a big result of its geometry, you've really got to load the back end of the bike. And then it puts a lot of weight on the back tire. It never skids, but man, it feels really cool carving on the back wheel like that through the turns. On the previous Occam, I was totally stoked on how well it could manual and wheelie. Everyone's upset because I always say wheelie instead of manual. To me, it's the same thing. To you, I guess it isn't. But yeah, this thing does wheelie really well. And we ended up coming down a motorcycle trail with lots of moto whoops, and this thing just wheelied right on through them, and that was super fun. It would go a lot further with less effort than I was expecting. That's also part of the geometry equation there, and you have a shorter front end and a shorter wheelbase. The bike's easier to get up on one wheel. It's easier to do those kind of tricky maneuvers with. That's a lot of fun.
That was fun. That was nice. Vlog.
Some of the faster, bigger hits, that's where this bike gives up a little bit to the longer enduro bikes. We found a couple moto whoops that you could gap, but you had to be going like over 30 miles an hour. And that's a little bit pushing the limits for what this bike feels comfortable with doing. I totally got through it, no problem, had fun. But if your trails are constantly 30 miles an hour and faster, you might want to check out the Rayon instead of the Occam. You probably need an enduro bike and not a smaller trail bike, but it's cool. We have options, so depending on where we live and ride the most, we can buy a bike that makes the most sense for us.
Oh. Ah!
Oh, hey, what's up?
Yo.
Have fun.
Good job.
That's me. What's your name?
Matt Esterly, I just was telling you I gave you some beta on the KTM.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, right on.
Yeah, I need to get a proper dirt bike right now. I've been without one since April. It's sad.
No, I hear you.
Now, before we wrap this video up, I just want to give us all a friendly reminder that we're not the only trail users out there. There's also motorcycles, horseback riders, and pedestrians. So do your best to be friendly to everyone you see. Now, back to the Occam. This is a really cool bike. No, it's not the perfect bike for everyone, but for the right use case, it's a pretty cool ride. I want to give a big thanks to Jensen USA for sponsoring this video. I've had an absolute blast getting to ride this bike. And once again, I do have that link over to the Occam listing at Jensen's website in the description below. If you guys enjoyed this video, do me a solid, hit that red subscribe button down below. Let me know your Occam related questions in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you all again after I've swapped some of the parts on this bike over to my personal favorites. Thanks everyone, I'll see you around.